Hello there, and welcome to Recon Paint Gaming. I'm Patrick. Today we're going to be painting Sunny Bounder. I've been going through a lot of the cards for Scum recently, and I've been seriously loving their paint schemes. I actually have a stack next to my desk that I'm going to be going through. Next up is going to be the Cartel Executioner, which it's like black and gold. It's going to look amazing. But today I chose Sunny Bounder because I've been doing a lot of camo schemes because I paint a lot of tanks. So we are going to be painting the camo scheme on Sunny Bounder, which it is very interesting because it's a lot of greens. There's some brown, and then there is basically hints of a lighter green, and then it kind of goes to yellow. Even the front screen there is purple. So I'm very intrigued by this model. We're going to go through how I was actually able to paint it. You can actually go check out Instagram and our social media accounts to see the full or completely painted model. So normally I would paint a model black, or I would prime it before starting. A few things. The great thing about the X-Wing models is that they come pre-painted, so you don't really need to prime them. The paint goes right over the top of it. You just have to worry about the undercoating, which I wasn't too worried about because I was going to be painting it a green. It's basically a greenish yellow underneath mixed with some purple, so I'm just going to go over it with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that I get the base coat that I want, and as well as the front glass there as well. The other thing I normally do is I use my airbrush to prime this, but there was actually a comment that I saw asking how I did another one of my models, which was one of my tanks with a camo pattern on it, and so I wanted to oblige. I'll even paint a tank with a brush as well. I've already started that video of painting a Nash horn. So today I'm doing a brush. I just wanted to show you the technique of getting started with a model, because you don't want to glob the paint on, and you'll always hear you want thin, even coats, which, I mean, to someone who doesn't know exactly what that means, it could mean anything. But for the people who hear it and, don't understand, basically you don't want to overload the brush, because you would, when I was painting or starting out, basically you just glob paint on and you try to hide it as fast as possible. But you can't really do that, because with every brush stroke, obviously the paint's going to pool in some places, not others. It's not going to be thin and even. So you actually want to apply a little bit of paint, and it will take a little bit longer because you'll have to add several coats depending on the paint and depending on what type of model it is. But basically you want to put a little bit of paint on, paint the model, see if that's a good enough coat. If it's not, then go over it again, because also you don't want brush strokes to show up, because that's going to cause an uneven surface. Most of the surface on this is flat, and you're going to immediately have issues with light reflecting, or it's going to look differently colored in other areas, and it's going to make the model not look the way you want, or you're not going to understand, why does my model look lighter green here but darker green here, and why does it look all wavy and stuff. So you just got to be careful when you're starting out. Thin and even coats, that's what that means. So I'm painting the undercarriage of the ship, because you actually, I like to paint the whole ship. I just don't like to paint the parts that you see. And there are a lot of divots or grooves in this model, especially along the bottom. So again, you don't want to just have a huge spot of paint on your brush and then just kind of dab it in there to get to the spots, because again, then it's going to lose its depth and it's not going to look correct. So again, apply light amount of paint, go in there as best as you can. You can change brush sizes using a smaller brush, using a larger brush, see if it fits a little bit better. And you also depending on how you want to paint this one. In this one, I wanted the whole entire model painted one color to start, even in those little grooves that have the darker color. So I go over this several times, making sure I get rid of all those lines, because you don't want lines when you're painting camo. When you're painting camouflage, you literally want the entire model to be a pattern, and you don't want anything to really stick out, because you want it to be camouflaged. You know, when you do camouflage, you don't want people to recognize where you are, but also you don't want people to recognize what you are. So you want to throw up depth. You want them to question, what type of ship is that? Is that a C-95? Is that a Seek? Is that an A-Wing? Or is that a Fang fighter? I can't tell. And that'll really throw off your opponent. Of course, not in this game, because you know exactly who is what, but in the lore of things, or in the story. Alright, so the good thing is I have a lot of paints that are for painting tanks. So this was easy to come by. The first layer that I'm putting down is basically the World of Tanks USA tank. It's kind of like an olive, or it's not olive green, but it is a green, because USA tanks are usually olive green, but for World of Tanks they do kind of like a lighter green. Next, I'm going in with a purple. This one is called Green Stealer Purple. Because I used to paint Gene Stealers back in the day when I played Tyranids, which I did a lot of, and I loved the purple, and I was actually painting the carcasses of my Gene Stealers this purple, so it aligned perfectly with my base coat. Because when you do paint these models, especially when I was painting the glass, you want to start with a solid color that kind of is in between the light parts and the dark parts. That way you can apply dark parts easily, and also light parts, and it'll lighten your original coat. You don't want to start with a super light coat and then go dark. It's not going to come out right. You'll end up doing more work than is needed. So now I'm painting the brown, which this is a air model paint. It's called Mahogany, which is actually by Vallejo Paints Model Air. I'm doing a thinner paint here because if you'll notice, all of these cards for X-Wing, most of the paint schemes, not all, because some of them I believe are digitally done, some are, you know, hand painted. A lot of them look like almost either watercolor or are actually done with paint. So a lot of the colors kind of blend together or aren't very prominent. It's like, I actually do love the art style. I don't want to get it wrong and say that I don't like the way that this, you know, they do these cards. I really do. But in looking at a lot of them, they look like they're actually hand painted, and I won't say degraded, but I will say with not high resolution, and I like that even better, especially when I'm trying to replicate or paint them, because then I don't have to be as precise. I can kind of like, you know, blot the colors on and then have them kind of like blend out. So it does look like that spot is brown, but as it gets closer to the edges, it kind of melts or fades into the rest of the colors there. And you'll notice that as I go throughout the model, that you can definitely distinguish colors between, you know, you can see the dark greens, the light greens, the greens, the yellows, and the browns. You'll notice where it is on the ship, but you don't really know where they start and end. And I like that, especially in this model, because you only get one angle of it. The bottom, I'm just doing guesswork. I'm kind of like wrapping around the paints and mimicking the same colors on the bottom as well, because I want to make sure that the whole entire model's covered, not just the top. Alright, so now I'm doing a green underneath, or I'm starting with the green as well. This is a different color green. This is my yellow olive by Model Air. Again, you can definitely tell as I'm painting it, it's darker than the USA tank green, but not by much. Because again, you'll see later on when I go over it with a darker green that I'm just plotting out where these camouflage spots are, and I'm just kind of drawing out my design. I don't want it to be the final product. Also, I am kind of testing it because you'll notice when you're painting, especially as I'm doing this now, parts of it are going to dry. It's not going to look the way that it did as you were painting it. And, you know, lighting changes all the time as well. You want a good light source when you do this, as I have. So I have a light above me, I've got lights behind me to make sure that I can see the model for what it is. And again, this is also going to help later when I'm kind of blending the colors together, because I'll go in darker later, but I won't go all the way to the edges because I want it to fade or make it look like it's fading out into those colors, which is why I'm going to be using so many greens today as well. So as you saw right there, I stop and a little compare. I do that a lot when I'm doing these replications or painting the card art or trying to replicate it, because I really love making them look exactly like they do on the card. I mean, I've already done Drew, I've done Morallo, I've done Bosk, and now I'm on to Sunny Bounder. So I really love comparing to make sure that I'm sticking to the model's actual art card as much as possible. And here I'm just going along the edges because the ship is very thin, but it's also thick enough to where you can... I was able to paint the sides to where when the camouflage wrapped around it, it completely went along the edges as well. So I'm just going back in, making little parts a little bit darker where they need to. And yet again, another green. This green's by Citadel. It is a layer, it's a Straken or Straken green. This is going to be the start of my highlights, because again, the card is very interesting because it is, you would say, oh, you know, that's green, but then it's kind of yellowish at the same time, as well as being lime green. So this is just to start with the highlights. It's going to come in later and lighter. Yeah, and this is me going over it again, because again, when you put on lighter colors, sometimes it will look great and you're like, oh, perfect, and then it dries and then it doesn't look as light, or you don't see it almost at all and you're like, okay, it needs another coat. It's either too thin or I didn't apply enough of it. So that's why it's great. You'll see these videos in short time, but in real time this takes lots of hours, and you do have to take breaks. You have to let some things dry. And as you can see, in certain times when I turn the model, it's shiny, so you can see that the paint's still wet, and it can affect how a model comes out, especially if you paint it and then you try to go back over it with a different color, and that's just going to mix the two colors rather than actually paint the model. So don't be afraid to take breaks. Don't be worried to dry things. I know there are model painters that actually have like a quick drying model mount to where they just put the model under it and it dries it really quick because they need to get through the model faster. I love doing these videos now because I used to watch them constantly to learn how to paint, and now that I'm actually doing them, it's a learning process. So, just because you see someone paint a model in like 30 minutes, that's not how it actually happened. There's editing involved. There's stopping and waiting for things to dry, or rethinking how you painting or what your approach is going to be for the next part. And yeah, I'm thoroughly enjoying these videos, so I hope you guys are as well. So there is kind of like a bridge or a brace to the windshield on the front, and on the ship it's very bright because of course the glass is reflecting light, and you can see that it's very light in the top middle of that model. There's kind of like a streak of light going down the back of it, so I'm just hitting those up now with the same green, and I'm going to blend it later. I'm going to go in also and hit those spots on the back, as you can see right now, because I want to start lightening those a lot, because that is the brightest part of the model. And it's a really interesting art card because it's in a hangar. There's lots of shadow, there's lots of light as well. You can see those more towards the edges of the little bay that it's in. Towards the top corners it's like almost white, and then as you get deeper down into it, it almost turns black. which is really why I wanted to paint this model. It was a very interesting color concept. Yeah, so here I am just looking at the model, making sure everything is the way it is and that the colors are correct. All right, so this next section, I'm going to be going into the other parts of the wing that aren't exactly the base color, but aren't exactly dark. So for this, I'm using the USSR paint to kind of add a little bit more to the color depth, or the color palette rather. So you can see that I'm kind of just adding random blots here and there, because it's, again, the model's very funny when it comes to which greens are greens, and you can even see I'm painting that front part of the wing, and in the photo you can see the base color, but then you can see that it's not the dark green, it's not the light green. So I'm just going in, and also it's going to help blend those highlights later, again, because I'm going lighter, darker concepts of the green. So I'm just lucky that I have all these greens at my disposal, which it also came very helpful in my orc painting days, because I did used to own orcs as well in 40K and painted a lot of those. So now I'm going again back over with the same green as before for highlighting, just hitting those odd spots to where the light is really reflecting bright now that I've gone in with the USSR as well as the black green. So this is going to really help the highlights start to come forward more now that I'm putting on a second coat as well. And don't always be afraid to go back over something if it didn't come out right, because when I paint these things, you know, it's taken me years. I have a plan or a mode of attack. I know basically what I'm going to be doing. I'm setting out my paints to get ready. I'm matching them up as best as possible, but as you paint, you're going to notice that things didn't come out the way that you want, and that's okay. You can try to deal with them as best as you can, but you know, you can always add another layer of paint. Like if you get to the point to where you're painting like on your 8th or 9th layer because you painted too far this way or too far that way, or I need this part lighter, shoot, now it's too light, I need it darker, it will start to make the model look a little bit flush, or you know, it'll lose its depth because you're painting over the actual model too much, and it's kind of bubbling out the thing itself. But like as you can see here, I'm now using the USA tank paint to go back and again blend it back into itself and kind of lessen the highlights a little bit, because I went a little bit too far, or I didn't like how that certain aspect came out. And so that's always another huge tip. Always know what your base coat color is. That way you can go back and paint certain parts that you didn't want to be you know, shaded or highlighted, because if you try to like match it later, it's not going to come up good, or it's going to look weird. So that's also a great eraser tool, is to go back over with your base coat, not heavily but lightly enough. All right, so now this is the next and final step for my greens, because again, I painted the whole model and it was coming out great, but then because of my blending, my dark green wasn't as dark as I thought it was. So now I'm using what's called olive green from Model Air Vallejo paints. This stuff is much darker. It is watered down because it's meant for an airbrush. And as you can see, as I said before, I'm not going to the edges. I'm kind of painting the middle of it, because I've already gone over it with my base coat color green, my darker greens along it as well. And now I'm hitting it with this green. So it's kind of just going to look like it's fading out towards the edges, which is really what I wanted. Because when I, again, look at this photo, that's kind of what it's doing. And it's going to really make it look like I painted it with watercolors almost. To where when you paint with watercolors, it kind of bleeds out a little bit depending on how much paint you put on the brush and how many times you go over it. Because That's what this looks like to me. It was painted like with watercolors or kind of with a broad strokes brush, but the detail is still showing underneath. So I'm doing the final touches, kind of making things up as I go along at this point, because again, it is only a one angled shot. I didn't want to look up any other photos of Sunny Bounder's ship because I wanted to stick with the original card itself. So I'm just going over the parts again. And also, if it does look a little dark in the photo, I was painting a little bit darker greens there as well, even though there might not be camo there. But when you hold up the actual ship next to the photo, it matches very closely. All right, so I am almost done with the greens and all of these little spots here. There is this little tip on the wing. Still doing a little bit of touch up here and there. Yep, even like little streaks and lines as well, and not forgetting about the front, because again, the front might not even have any camo underneath that little front part of the cockpit there, but because the photo has it as darker because of the shades, I painted it as darker. So again, you are making them as close as possible to the art, but you're also kind of improvising at the same time. All right, so now it is time to head into the yellow part of the ship. It actually isn't yellow for, sake of sakes. It's still green, but because the way the light hits the model in the photo, it kind of brightens the green so much it turns yellow. It could be a yellow lamp or whatever, but it is what it is. So we're going to start painting it anyways. And for this, I actually started my brightest, and I'm working my way down, which I know is the opposite of what I said before. But I've technically never done this to where I painted a model ship a different color than what it actually is because of lighting effects. So I'm working with bright, which actually is not too bright. This is Demonic Yellow from the Army Painting War Paints set. I'm just kind of laying down my path here for where the highlights hit the brightest, and then I'm going to use my medium yellow to blend it back down into the ship, which is from Model Air or Vallejo paints. And the only reason I'm doing it this way is the way that it hits. I couldn't blend it up by painting dark into light, because yellows are hard to work with, especially when you're painting over a darker layer. So I wanted to go in as the lightest I could and work my way backwards, just because I thought it would be easier to blend. Plus, you still want the green to kind of come through the yellow. You don't want it too bright, because then it's going to draw your eye away from the actual model, which isn't good, which you have to pay attention to. Like, highlights are great, making a cool feature of the model is amazing, but if all of a sudden that's all your eye's drawn to, that's all you're going to see. So now I'm going back in with the medium yellow and kind of pushing it back down into the green. So that way the yellow is going to still be my highest point, but it's also going to drown out rather quickly and back into the ship, so that it relaxes your eye and it's not like the first thing that you're going to want to focus on. You'll also notice that I use my fingernail as kind of a wiping palette. I do have a wet palette that I use because I like my paints to stay wet as I go, but as I said from the beginning, you really want to not have your brush loaded with paint. You'll even notice that the paint never really goes higher than half of the brush. You don't want the paint all the way up to the metal part of your brush, because the paint's going to seep into there and ruin your brush. Even if you are the best brush cleaner in the world, eventually your brush is going to start fraying out and have kind of like that, poofy look. So you want to keep your paints towards the tip, because that's where you're applying the paint. So you want the brush to put the paint on the actual model itself. And secondly, it doesn't glob the paint on. It doesn't mess up what you're trying to accomplish. So you know, I use my thumb. People use, a piece of ceramic to wipe on. Some people use a paper towel to wipe it down real quick. You also don't want your brush super wet, so after you rinse off your brush, make sure that you wipe it down on something to dry it. Because if you don't, you're then going to apply paint. It's going to wash your paint, and then you're going to apply it, and it's either going to be too thin, or it's going to be so thin that it's just going to bleed all over your model, and it'll look like it blew out. So just keep that in mind when you're applying your paints. And I like thin paints because I can apply it, see if that's the direction I want to go. If I don't want to go that direction, I can easily just wipe it off because it's still wet. And then I can go at it differently or at another approach. Because if you apply, base coats or layer coat paints, those are going to stay pretty well. You can always just wet another brush and kind of wipe it away, but that might interfere with your lower layers that you just did. So just be mindful, take your time. There is speed painting, but there really is there's no quick way to paint, is what I'm basically saying. And I'm just lightly going over certain parts again with the yellow, not very heavily. As you can see, you might even not see it on the camera how much of a difference I'm making. It might be very subtle or not, but I'm just trying to match those highlights now with the middle part of the ship. So again, that it doesn't basically capture or draw your eye in one direction. And now I'm keeping this part in because now I'm actually moving the card in the ship to another part of the lighting. I really was seeing if I was seeing something. I know that doesn't make sense, but basically I'm focused. There's a camera in front of me as I'm trying to paint, so there might be a little shadow that I don't like. So I brought it into a clear area to where I could hold it unobstructed and make sure that I'm able to see it for what it was. So yeah, now I thought that the yellow was too light, so I'm going back in with the medium yellow again, trying to blend it and get it back down to a reasonable highlight or yellow. I think I was thinking at this moment I should have started with the medium yellow rather than the demonic yellow, but guess what? It all worked out in the end. Again, because I paused, I took a look at what I was doing, and I came back in and I fixed what I did. Yeah, you can see that now it's nowhere near as bright as it was because I'm applying very thin layers to the whole thing and getting it back down to that green. I believe I went back in with some green earlier with the USA tank or the USSR tank to try and fix one of the side parts of the ship itself. Oh, I am almost done with the model. There is the front glass part. I did paint that. It did look amazing. Again, you can go check it out online. I just didn't have the camera. Something happened with the footage. I didn't get the front part of the glass. But if you follow the techniques here, so you can start with a dark purple, kind of work your way around the edges, leaving that highlight available. And you can either mix your paints by, like what I did, I added a little bit of white to my purple, which again, that was the Gene Sealer purple. I added a bit of white, and then I kept going a little bit more white each time I blended towards that highlight white mark on the front windshield. And also I added some black to where I then fade it back down into the dark parts. And when you get to the highlight part of the windshield, it's not white. It looks white, but you really want it a very light purple. So that way, when you do paint it, it looks kind of whitish, but it doesn't, like when you paint white for a highlight on the windshield, it's going to be so bright, it's going to throw off the model. You always want some of the original color in that highlight on glass. There are moments to where, reflections in the glass and you'll see like a blue or a green. That's fine. You can always do that, but almost never go full white. It doesn't work. It doesn't come out the way that you want. So that's it for today. Again, you can see the final product on our Instagram page. and check out my final work. I really had fun painting this model, and I loved how it came out. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you had any issues painting, or what issues you run into. I will be doing more of these. My next is a Nash horn, which I've already started. I put on a base coat. We're going to be doing camo and the whole thing in brush as well, so the people who only have brushes can follow along. And we'll go over which brushes I use and what sizes as well, because there are a lot of people who just grab some generic brushes and that's all they have. That's how I started. And then as you get more in depth, or the more time you spend on painting, or the better you want to get painting your models, you're going to want to invest in things like I have right now, probably 100 different paint colors of different types of layers and highlights, contrasts, inks, and so on and so forth, as well as newer brushes, different types of primers and stuff like that. So I'm very happy to share this with you guys. The feedback has been amazing. A lot of people are really enjoying these painted X-Wing ships, even though they come pre-painted. You like your ships to come out a little bit different. But thank you guys again. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and have a good one.